Welcome to the show called Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. This is the show where we talk about everything homeschooling, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We want to affirm and encourage you in the decision to homeschool, challenge and inspire you to take it to new heights, and celebrate everything you get to experience along the way in this adventure of a lifetime. I'm your host, Carman, and I want to remind you, our listening audience, that you can watch us on YouTube, or you can keep listening on your favorite podcast app. Today's show is titled Raising Gender Confident Kids, and we have a guest, Jeff Myers. All right, Dr. Jeff, let's talk homeschool. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Davis, great to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. We got a really interesting topic today on raising gender confident kids based on a new book that you've written with Dr. Kathy Koch. So very briefly, just tell us the snapshot view of what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll dive into a conversation.
Well, this is the first collaboration that I've had with Dr. Kathy Koch on a book. So we are both very excited. It's a topic that we've both been passionately interested in writing about, but it just didn't come together until Summit Ministries, the ministry that I have the privilege of leading, was able to last year start a publishing company to focus on mass market books on key topics that seem impossible. So why not start with gender ideology?
So this is the first book with that new publishing company?
Well, this is actually the second book. The first one was Should Christians Support Israel?
Okay.
So there was another impossible topic.
I actually read that book.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Well, it was a fun book to do. Obviously, it's an issue that's very tense, but only probably 7% of the population really is interested in paying attention. They pay attention more if there's an actual war going on, but most people aren't. They don't really see how Israel fits into their lives. Gender, that fits every single person.
Right. So let's look at the title first. Gender confidence. What are you trying to say by that? Why does that matter? And what's the definition of gender confidence?
Yeah, gender confidence is the opposite of gender confusion. So let me talk about gender confusion for just a moment. Gender confusion is what we have currently in the culture for a variety of reasons, and some of it has to do with the medical industry, some has to do with the way public schooling has handled the issue, some has to do with social media, gender ideology. There are a number of reasons, but we have a rising generation, Gen Z, those who are now up into their 20s, who are very confused. They don't see that being male or female is relevant to anything that's important, or they think that male and female are interchangeable. They do not see being male or female as an essential part of God's design and an essential part of their identity. So young adults today are 1,600% more likely than those over the age of 50 to say they do not identify as their birth gender. And you see this in a number of different ways, but it's created tremendous confusion. And here's how we see it. Confusion is hard for a culture because we want a frictionless life, but confusion always presents an opportunity. And the opportunity in this case is to do something we should have done all along, which is help our boys and girls have gender confidence, for our boys to be able to know what the path is to godly manhood, and for girls to the path to godly womanhood. So we show them how to set aside the stereotypes and develop instead what we call an understanding of God's imago types, who we are based in how God made us to be. And that is the focus of the book. So it isn't just for people who have a child saying, I think I've been born in the wrong body, or what have you. But it's really to prevent the struggle by helping parents form a strong, good, healthy path to what we call gender confidence.
Okay. So yeah, you mentioned the role of parents already. And I'm thinking as you're talking that kids are born in a family. They got a mom and a dad, or maybe they're in a single parent home. But we know that family is a central institution to civilization, to a biblical world that we would like to have. And yet there's confusion among these kids. So is this partly a breakdown in what parents are communicating, or specifically, what can a parent do to effectively explain this to their kids? Because ideally, the parents are going to be the first best place to have these conversations, either prompted by the parents or maybe the kids are asking, maybe they're not. But what would be your counsel to parents on how to start tackling this proactively?
Now, there's a lot to unpack there. In the book, we have about 200 conversation starters on every imaginable issue related to gender. How do you say this? How do you open the conversation? How do you talk with your child about this? And it's going to be different depending on the age. There will be elementary children who will, it might start with a conversation like, Mommy, that man with the beard there is wearing a dress. Why? And then you have the opportunity to begin the conversation. For middle schoolers, it usually has to do with puberty. As they're emerging into puberty and as their bodies change, they might find themselves feeling uncomfortable in their body. Well, the culture has a way of explaining that uncomfortableness. It says that you're uncomfortable because you literally were born in the wrong body. So that's going to be the conversation that needs to take place. For high school age students, it usually has more to do with identity. This is what we're talking about here is mostly before the question of sexual activity. It's not a question of who do I want to be intimate with. It's a question of who am I as a person. So I'll just give you some examples of the confusion that parents are having to address. One boy came home from school and told his mom, my friend said, if I haven't kissed a girl, that means I'm gay. So I think I'm gay. He hadn't processed through it further than that. It was just an upsetting conversation he had with his peers. How a parent handles that conversation is going to be critical for that child's future confidence. I had a student here at Summit Ministries who was a woman called into engineering. She went to her school and she was immediately told, if you're a girl and you're interested in engineering, that means you're a boy trapped in a girl's body.
Mm.
It's unbelievable that people would say this, but it does happen in the schools and through peers, through peer relationships. So those are the situations that parents might have to face. And with the elementary child who sees somebody who's really confusing, and it's a little scary for a child. If you see a bearded big man wearing a dress, it makes the child feel afraid. So to be able to sit down with them and say, um, honey, in life, there are a lot of people who they've never learned to become comfortable being uncomfortable in their lives because there are things that happen that are uncomfortable. And some people get really confused about who they are. And it's sad and it can be a little bit scary, but we love people and we know that they are made in God's image. But there are some people who are so confused that they believe they have been born in the wrong body. And I just want you to know that God made you exactly the way He wants you to be. You're a girl or you're a boy, and God made you that way. And as your mom or dad, one of my goals is to help you feel confident that you were made just exactly the way God wanted you to be.
Yeah, even hearing you talk about this, hypothetical but hopefully common conversation that a parent could have with the child to say just that God made you exactly right, male or female. That hearing that from a parent over and over again, like a lot of conversations like this need to happen a lot more than once, reinstill that security, that confidence,
Yes.
and that understanding in a child that, okay, it may have started sounding confusing from my peers or even from my self-thought and just observing the world around me that is in strange places. But if the parents will engage and have the conversation, broach the subject, but then specifically remind them that God made them correct in His image, male and female, I actually think there's a lot of really good theological conversations that can happen that would have never happened because of the confusion. And like you say, it actually can
Yeah.
create an opportunity to discuss what does it mean to be made in God's image, male and female. And it even makes me think as an adult. I remember the first time I saw someone who was gender confused. I was on a plane, and one of the flight attendants was just that, a bearded man in a dress. And it was really fascinating to watch how people reacted to this. I was both mad and I felt compassion for the person. uh, and partly because it was the shock of the first time seeing this in real life and having to figure out how to address it in some way, shape, or form. But for these young kids in junior high, high school, looking at this for the first time, probably never having really thought it through, they're going to need help, and parents are clearly the best first place. But at the same time, I'm sure parents are not only a little nervous or fearful about how to tackle this, but they probably make some mistakes like we all do as parents. So what are some common pitfalls that parents might make in having these conversations? And they don't want to make it worse, but what are, you've mentioned some things to say. What are some things maybe to avoid, or mistakes to watch out for?
Yeah, there's one really big one, and it's so much a part of the culture that it's very easy to make this mistake. Let me talk about making mistakes as parents. I'm a dad for you've got a large family. Uh, you can easily become overwhelmed with feelings of guilt or shame at the way you handled something, and you look back later and think, "Oh, I wish I'd known that 5 years ago because I would have handled it differently." Um, we serve a God of grace, and He gives us the grace to learn and to grow. The question is, what do we do now that we know going forward? Not should we sit and stew over what we don't think we did quite right in the past.
No, excellent.
So the biggest thing, the biggest issue on gender confidence is the culture has given us this idea of what's called a gender spectrum, that you have extreme masculine over here, extreme male, and extreme female over here. You have G.I. Joe and you have Barbie. And nobody is really G.I. Joe or Barbie. So most of us are actually really more toward the middle, which means we are all transgender. We are all non-binary. That idea of the gender spectrum is a lie.
Yeah.
It is a straight out lie. There is nothing, and Dr. Kathy Cook is an educational psychologist. I've been working in the human communication field and with biblical worldview for decades. There is no evidence for the gender spectrum, not one piece of evidence for it. It is a lie. The idea that humans are on a spectrum is not true. Now, you could say that there is a masculine spectrum and a feminine spectrum, but it is the case in all of the research as well as just our common sense and in our theology that the most tomboyish girl has more in common with the most feminine girl than she does with the most effeminate boy. That idea of the gender spectrum is so universally taught and believed that parents almost unconsciously accept it. And your children almost certainly accept it. If you were to Google the word transgender, and I did this in the course of writing the book, I was 5 pages deep into the search results before I found anything that questioned the transgender agenda in any way at all. The first page, in fact, was frightening. Here are the facts, quote unquote, it said. And then it would say things that were absolutely not factual, that were, in fact, a lie, and treat them as the facts. Other pages said things like, here's how to get transgender hormone treatments without your parents knowing about it. Here's a law firm that will help you legally separate from your parents if they don't accept your transgender identity. That was the first page of results on Google.
Yeah.
So one of the things parents feel guilty about is that they don't know how to, they feel like they're in a debate with their child and they lose the debate. Because if your child has researched, quote unquote, on the internet, of course, this is what they're going to end up with. But that is the number one thing, that gender spectrum idea. Why is it so damaging? Well, because it's actually literally false. There are not just one or two differences between males and females. When it comes to male and female humans, there are 6,500 catalog differences between males and females. There is no way, in spite of what a lot of students believe, and I talk with many who are moving in the transgender direction, they somehow have come to believe their medical doctors either allow this or their teachers allow this, or they're being indoctrinated. But they have come to believe that if you're a boy, You can actually become a girl or vice versa. It simply isn't true. It's not true physically. And any attempts to manipulate the body to make that happen don't make it better. And in the research, we're now finding it usually makes it far worse in the long run for a child.
Well,
I could probably say a lot more about it, but yeah.
this is already very eye-opening, even for myself, especially on the spectrum, because I've had conversations with folks, and I've tried to think it through myself in terms of how to, give an apologetic against transgenderism, because I certainly believe that God made us male and female. So just to make sure I'm understanding, so our audience can understand, you're saying there's not one spectrum for one gender, but there is a spectrum for male and a spectrum for a female. But the confusion happens thinking that you can kind of be male or female on this one spectrum, far left or far right, the G.I. Joe versus the Barbie. And we're all just trying to figure out, where are we on this one scale? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. Why are people so confused? Because we do have many organ systems in common. My digestive system is very similar to my wife's digestive system. So is my circulatory system. So is my skin system. But we are very different in all of the significant ways relating to gender. And that is why don't people see it? I think it's because it's almost like they hate the idea that we have gender stereotypes, but they end up enshrining the stereotypes, almost worshiping them as indicative of who we actually are. So if you have a boy who likes to play the piano and sing, he will get the very clear impression in the culture that he might actually be a girl trapped in a boy's body. This is an evil thing for the culture to say to a child, because they're not saying to the child, there's something wrong with your body. If there's something wrong with your body, you might be able to get it fixed through nutrition or medical care. But it's saying that your body itself, as an actual ontological object with a personal relationship attached, is wrong and cannot be fixed. That is a terrible thing to say to a child. So some part of what we have to do is help our children realize, look, gender is something that you were designed with. God gave it to you. It isn't something that you have to become. It is not a performance. It is not you having to compare yourself to other children and try to figure out where you fit in the spectrum. Now, the very last of the Ten Commandments is do not covet. And when I share with our students at Summit Ministries, I just look them in the eye and say, what that means at root is don't try to be somebody else.
Well
Just
said.
be you. Just be you. God made you the way he did on purpose. I have a daughter who's a helicopter pilot. If she grew up today, undoubtedly, she would be told that because she's working in a male-dominated field, that she must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. I have two brothers who are musicians. Both are highly emotionally intelligent. They would undoubtedly be told that they were girls trapped in boys' bodies. All of this is a lie. It's not even a good conversation tool for
Right.
people. It's just the way of a culture controlling people in order to try to tear down something that is an objective truth for purposes that are devious, um, even evil.
Right. No, I'm thinking of adults in my life who have struggled with what they call sexual identity issues or sexual identity confusion. And yet, part of what you're trying to do with this book is to create gender confidence. So, explain a little bit the connection between that, between identity formation and gender clarity. Uh, because this is really fascinating. It's a clear topic that people need to be aware of, especially if they have kids that are growing up into these ages where the culture is going to give them wrong messages, ungodly messages. So, as for the parents listening, help us understand that difference between identity formation and gender clarity, so that they can help their kids have that gender confidence that we're seeking through the goal of this book.
Yes, and I realized I didn't give people a place to go if they need more information on this. At any point, you can go to genderconfidentkids.com. You can get the book there, but you can also find a number of other helpful resources. If your family is, if you've got a child who said, I think I've been born in the wrong body or something like that, or maybe even an adult child who says, you, my parent, you're a hateful bigot because you don't accept my lifestyle. I'm cutting you out of my life. You need some equipping, and you go to genderconfidentkids.com, and that's where we can help you. So, what's the relationship between identity formation and gender confidence? Identity confidence is critical, and we teach that you have identity confidence by having five core needs met in your life. Those five core needs are met best by God, but there are things we as parents can do to help our children develop those things. The first one is a sense of is this, well, I'll just give them all five of them to you, but one is just a sense of security. One is a sense of belonging. One is a sense of identity. Uh, One is a sense of purpose, and one is a sense of competence. So the belonging question is, where do I fit? The identity question is, who am I? The security question is, who can I trust? The purpose question is, why am I here?
Mhm.
And the competence question is, what can I do? So in a way, all five of those things are things that we seek to have met for our child. They're going to be met best by God because He's the one who designed us. How does identity confidence relate to that? Well, how does gender confidence relate to that? Gender confidence is a subset of identity confidence. People who are clear about their identity almost never struggle with their gender identity because they know who they are. And they have a sense, well, there are times in my life where I'm going to be uncomfortable, and I'm learning to become comfortable being uncomfortable. I do not expect to have a frictionless life. And so, as I grow into what God has designed me to be, I know that I can take certain things for granted. I am designed by God. He made me on purpose. He gave me specific gifts and interests and abilities that He didn't give to anybody else. And He's also made me male or female, which also affects who I'm going to be. Let's see, what else was I going to say about that? I think that what we're finding is that if a young person doesn't undergo gender transition, if they aren't going through a social transition or medical transition, 90% of the time, probably more than 90%, but at least 90% of the time, by the time they finish puberty, they are reconciled with being congruent
Okay.
with their biological gender.
Okay.
So gender is two things. It's physiological and it's psychological. There's a soul aspect to it and there's a body aspect to it. And if you never even read past the first chapter of the Bible, you would know this. God made human beings in His image. That's our soul. It's not that God has a body and His body looks kind of like our body, like they have in the Sistine Chapel. God is a spirit. Does not have a body as we do. But our essence, there's an essential nature to us that is made in God's image. And that's the soulish aspect. The second thing we know about humans is God made them male and female. That's from Genesis chapter 1. And Jesus affirmed this. He said, did you not read that God made them male and female? So from the Old Testament to the New Testament, this is a consistent thing. It's only in our age, in our culture, where there are people in power who are motivated to tear down any kind of objective truths that this has been called into question.
Yeah, and that is one of the fascinating things about how modern this whole idea is. There's many other sins and lies that you can trace back for 500,000, 1,500, 5,000 years. But this one is definitely got a more modern twist to it. So I got two more questions that are kind of related. You talked about peers and how they can send a message to kids that can cause the confusion. But the first question is, How does social media play into this as well? I'm sure there's some negative impacts that social media plays, just like peers. But then related, what warning signs can parents be looking for in their kids where they might need to bring up this conversation because they see their kids struggling in some way because they can tell they've had conversation with peers or they're reading too much on the internet or on social media. So how would you address those two things?
Yes. Let me say in a general way, when we work with a young adult who is gender confused, and it's more and more common, some 39%, I think, of Gen Zers say they identify as LGBTQ, 30% in the church. So if this is happening in your family, I just want you to know you're not crazy and you're not alone. This is something that's happening very much in the culture. The healthiest kids are the ones who first have a relationship with the same gender parent. So they're working on strengthening that relationship. If that same gender parent is not available in the home, maybe there's a single family home, there's not a dad there, there's not a mom there, you can help that child have a mentor of the same gender. It could be, they're like Trail Life USA. They have strong, godly men who help the boys. American Heritage Girls, they have strong, godly women who help the girls. It could be a coach, it could be a teacher, it could be a boss, it could be a grandparent. But that same gender relationship is important. The second thing is you've got to limit the access to social media. You just have to. As a minimum, we tell people no phones in your room. That if you're going to use it, you're going to be in the kitchen. And when we see stuff, because there's a lot of lies out there, kiddo, and when you see it, we got to talk about it right then. Otherwise, it can start to get into your heart and your mind. It's like a parasite, and it latches onto you and starts feeding on you. The third thing is there might actually have to be a change in the actual life situation. So, for instance, we were recently working with a young man who was being groomed by male peers in his school for a sexual relationship. That boy needed to be taken out of that school and moved to a different school. Because those other boys in the school that were taking their cues from the teacher, half the public schools in the country teach and inculcate principles of gender ideology. Half. And so when they do that in class, the other students sometimes take that as a license to prey on their peers. And I'm sorry to have to say all of this, but this is actually happening in the United States on a massive level to hundreds of thousands of children. You cannot leave them in that same situation. So you've got to move them to a new situation. God forbid it happens in a church, you got to get to a new church, right? So you've got to actually move the situation. All right. So back to the heart of the question. What social media have to do with it? Social media convinces young people that a world other than the one that actually exists. It is very articulate, clever posts on TikTok, Instagram, not Facebook so much for young people. I don't know any young people who use Facebook right now, but Instagram and TikTok, let's say. Very clever people, very articulate, saying things that are the opposite of what your parents have taught you growing up. And it's very easy to forget that these people don't love you. They don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They're just they're just spouting off. So is it interesting to see? Yeah, kind of, but you wouldn't believe it. They don't know you and they don't love you. It is so powerful that Lisa Lippman found in 2018 that two-thirds of young women who had identified as transgender said that they did so after a significant exposure to transgenderism in social media. That's the influence, two-thirds. All right, so what do you do? Was that the other part of your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
What signs can a parent be looking for
Yeah,
because their kids are on social media or listening to their peers, in ways that they're maybe thinking there's signs, but what are some signs
yeah.
they could be looking for?
The main sign you're going to be looking for is withdrawal. The child doesn't want to talk to you. Something's going on. And you know this from your own life growing up. If you did something that you knew was wrong, you didn't want to talk to your mom or dad. It is Satan's number one lie. This is so bad you can't tell your parents. Um, Obviously, we would prefer to be in a situation where our kids understand this is really so bad you got to talk to your mom or dad right away. That's where we would rather have them be. Uh, but that withdrawal, and the question is, can you help me understand what happened to you that is causing you to see yourself the way you do?
Yeah.
That is the core question. Now, if they don't feel safe, it might take some time to develop that. I want you to know things happen in life, and I know you don't want me to be disappointed. In fact, children have told us that they don't, if they think their parent is going to be sad or scared, they don't want to see their face.
Yeah.
Sometimes, at night when they're in bed and you're just sitting there talking, they can't see your face is a good time to have that conversation. With boys, side by side going someplace, get in the car, go somewhere, that's a good time to have those conversations where it's not face to face. But say, I know a lot of things that happen, I feel shocked by, and I do feel shocked because I'm very protective of you. If somebody hurts you, all I want to do is hurt them back. Okay, so that's what's going on in my heart. And I feel unsettled by this, but I want you to know you're safe with me. You're safe with me. I want to understand. Can you help me understand? And then do that until the conversation begins to open up a little bit. If they share something, then you can say, please tell me more, or tell me more about that, or I'm listening. Can you say more? Something like that that keeps the conversation going. You do not have to settle everything in one conversation. It's unlikely it will be settled in one conversation, nor do you have to make it the only thing you talk about. That makes kids really freaked out if the only thing you ever talk about is that one thing that's kind of a scab, right? If it just always gets picked at, then they'll quit bringing it up. So I don't know if that's helpful, Davis, but that's sort of how we have found it to be helpful with students.
No, and it
You
reminds me a lot of
got
my
kind of
own.
the stone face, right?
Right. It reminds
Yeah.
me a lot of my own parenting with, just bringing up the topic of sexuality. Uh, and one of the things we suggest to parents on that topic, or when this falls into that in some ways, is you're going to need to have more than one conversation. It's going to need to be so common that they feel safe, like you're saying, that you're driving in the car and they surprise you and bring up a question because you've already had this conversation going on in the background multiple times so that they know it's not a taboo subject. They can bring it up. And sometimes as a parent, we're afraid to bring it up. We're a little nervous about these kind of topics. We don't even feel fully equipped. And the goal of this book is to help parents be more equipped, more aware. But I'm reminded of just the many conversations I had sitting side by side in the car. When you mentioned that, I definitely related to that with the guys, because I had side by side conversations on a couch, on a porch, many of those, and then with my daughters, it tended to be face to face. Just the nature of that relationship. We're sitting at a meal, having tea or coffee together, but that one-on-one is like, hey, how are you doing with this topic? And then how are you doing with this topic? And so, like you say, it's not the only thing you talk about, but it's one of many things that are totally safe. And as a parent, you end up feeling a little bit more comfortable with the conversations as well, because just like any conversation, you go to bed, everybody processes it, and you have more questions or more comments, tomorrow or the day after, and it just kind of keeps the conversation going. But
Yes.
this does lead to another question that I have, because on the topic of sexuality in general, one big question is how early can or should a parent start having these conversations? So, on the topic of gender confusion and confidence, what would you suggest in terms of how is it too early or too late? When should a parent really be saying, I probably need to start this conversation, get the ball rolling so that it's a safe topic?
Mhm. Well, you can ask a handful of questions that will help you see. So one of my children, he had a really good peer group. He played soccer. He had good friends who were from good families. And it wasn't really until he was in high school that we talked about this. And it was essentially, hey, something that a lot of people have been talking about lately is transgenderism, people who think they're a girl trapped in a boy's body or boy trapped in a girl's body. Have you noticed any of that in school? And at that point, he was in the school. He'd been homeschooled before that. He said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, there was somebody who we always knew as a girl in elementary school, and all of a sudden she walked into the boys' room, and we're all like, what's going on with that?" That was literally the extent that he had processed it. And it wasn't a big deal. But to be able to say, yeah, I think a lot of what's happening is people get confused because they think that instead of thinking that they're males, and then there's some who are very rowdy, loud, aggressive boys, and some who are more quiet, thoughtful boys, and there's some girls who are loud and aggressive, and some girls who are more feminine. Instead of that, people think that everybody's all on one spectrum. And there's no evidence for this, but that's how people have gotten confused. Oh, okay, great. And that was almost literally the only conversation he needed about it.
Right.
I think there'll be others as you are, if you're in an urban area, you're going to see people walking down the street who are defying these stereotypes. Sometimes it's a girl wearing boys' clothing, and boys' clothing is more comfortable. So I think there are a lot of girls who they just go that way and they don't really care. But if you see a guy wearing a woman's clothing, that's going to startle a child, probably scare them a little bit. The more masculine the man, the more it's going to startle them. And they'll note if you see it, they probably saw it.
Yeah.
So it's probably time to sit down and say, I don't know if you noticed this, but there was a man with a beard and he was wearing a dress. Did you happen to see that? What did you think of it when you saw it? Is that something I can share with you about for a minute? Because I want you to know that you can always be safe to talk with me about confusing things that you see. And I want you to know that God made you just the way he did on purpose.
Right.
So that can happen even with, 5, 6, 7 year olds in some cases. You don't have to go into the details. It's almost never a sexual question. It's almost always an identity question. Who am I? And what they're really asking is, am I confused about who I am?
Okay.
And what might that confusion look like? There is one thing I do want to say too. This is an opportunity, and we talk about this in raising gender confident kids. There is a harmony between male and female. God designed us to be different on purpose.
Yeah.
And talking with our children about that harmony is not just something that they need to know when they later are in a romantic relationship where they could get married or they do get married. It's something that happens with brothers and sisters
Yeah.
and with children in youth group or in your homeschool co-op or wherever you happen to be. That God designed boys and girls to be different so that they could harmonize with one another. And I could just give you one quick example. We have different kinds of cells in our eyes. We have M cells and P cells, magnocellular or parvocellular cells. The parvocellular are the cones, and the magnocellular cells are the rods. We've all heard about that in biology class. You got rods and cones. Those are your retinal cells. But did you know that females have a preponderance of cones and males have a preponderance of rods? Why is that interesting? Well, cones are the kinds of cells that focus on color and texture. Rods are the kinds of cells that focus on contrast and motion. Girls generally will, if you give them something to draw, they will draw nouns. Boys will draw verbs. My daughters would draw an animal or a flower or our house. The boys would draw a tank, and they only needed black to draw the tank and then red to draw the blood squirting out of the people that were shot. And they would do that in church. I thought, I think I'm raising a couple of sociopaths here. No, but that's just the difference because they see the world differently. Well, how about this? If you want to see the world accurately, you need to see color, texture, contrast, and motion. Males and females literally need each other to see the world as it actually is. That's just one example. That God designed us to be different for the purpose of creating harmony. And that matters
Oh,
because,
yeah.
and as I was sharing with our Summit Ministry students last night, I want you to see one another as brothers and sisters because the truth is you're sons and daughters of a heavenly Father. And all those relationships matter. Those differences matter.
No, that's a fantastic, just or difference pointing out right there the harmony of just how our eyes work, how we see the world, how we relate with people. It is beautiful when you think about all that God is showing us about himself when we look at male and female correctly, that
Yeah.
we're both made in God's image, but with differences that matter, that create a harmony when in a better situation, a better light, and a more accurate way of viewing the world.
Yes.
So,
There's some great theology behind it. We do go into it a little bit in the book. This isn't a theological text.
yeah.
It's mostly a practical text. Everything we say, we also say, and here's how to say that, or here's how to ask that, or here's how to talk with your child about it. So we literally guide you step by step through the entire process. Because whether your child is struggling with transgenderism or not, helping them be gender confident is one of the most important things you can do.
Right. Well, and you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that you have over 200 conversations, which already, as a reader of parenting books, I love a parenting book that actually has practical tips and help,
Yeah.
question starters and prompts, answers to things. A parent is looking for practical advice. So it sounds like you got that. So as we start wrapping this up, Jeff, what is your hope for parents that get this book, Raising Gender Confident Kids? What's your hope? What's your recommendation? What have we not addressed that you want to make sure you mention to the listening audience right now? And then make sure you mention that website again so that people can, get the book and, see some other, pieces of information that would be helpful.
Yes, you go to genderconfidentkids.com. You can get the book there. You're pre-ordering it at this point because it comes out at the end of July. And I know these shows stay on the internet for a long, long time, but we're recording it in the middle of June. So depending on when you see this or hear it, that book will be out. But genderconfidentkids.com is the website. I love your question. What I would love to see happen with families is that they can settle into a confidence in God and say, everybody is so worked up about this gender thing. But here's how we handle this in our family. We believe that God made us on purpose. And the great thing about that is he thought through each one of us, every aspect of us. Take your child to Psalm 139 and just read that. Get it into their hearts. But for most children, they should not be having to worry about this. This is just a sad aspect of our culture that we have to talk about things that, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago we didn't have had to talk about very much. If you could just settle into recognizing your gender is not something you have to become. You don't have to be some sort of a perfect model. It's not the object of every girl to be a Barbie. It's not the object of every boy to be a G.I. Joe. We just do who God made us to be. And we don't turn to the culture's stereotypes about what we should be. Instead, we just ask God what he's designed us to be. And our goal in our family is that you become a person of character, that every day you wake up and you look around and say, what's going on around me and how can I help? And as you learn that, you will develop the sort of character that will help you become a strong, godly person in the future. One young woman told us when she was young, she felt insecure because she had frizzy hair, braces, glasses, and she was comparing herself to a very cute cheerleader who was also in her church. And her youth group leader, a woman, said something very wise to her. She said, you know what? Someday you're going to figure out what to do with your hair. You're going to lose the braces and you're going to get contacts. But what you are developing during this period of your life will last forever, and that is your character.
That's good.
That's, I think, the core message we want our kids to hear.
No, that's fantastic. And I tell you what, this has been a great conversation, Jeff. I'm so glad you were able to be on the show to talk to folks about this topic. I'm glad you got a resource available for folks to get more information and get those 200 questions to get some practical advice to how to talk to their kids about this. But as always, these conversations have to come to a close eventually. So we're going to do that now. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us again next time. This has been Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. And I've been your host, Davis Carman, with our guest, Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries. Have a great day, and until next time, we're walking by faith and enjoying the homeschooling adventure of a lifetime.